The morning sun cast long shadows across the military base as Sarah Mitchell walked through the gates for the first time. Her medical bag felt heavier than usual, not because of its contents, but because of the weight of starting over. At 28, she had already lived through more than most people could imagine. Though nobody here knew that yet, the Navy SEAL training facility buzzed with activity. Men in combat gear moved with purpose, their faces hardened by years of warfare and training. Sarah kept her head down, focusing on her assignment as the new combat medic. She had specifically requested this position, far from the spotlight. Far from questions about her past. Commander Jake Reynolds stood at the entrance of the medical bay, his intimidating presence commanding respect from everyone who passed. His reputation preceded him, a decorated SEAL with over 15 years of service, multiple deployments, and a no-nonsense attitude that had kept countless soldiers alive. He looked Sarah up and down as she approached, his expression unreadable. "Dr. Mitchell, I presume," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed without question. "Welcome to Hell Week preparation. These men push their bodies to the absolute limit. Your job is to keep them breathing and moving when their minds tell them to quit." Sarah nodded quietly, her green eyes meeting as briefly before looking away. There was something in her gaze that caught Jake's attention, a depth that spoke of experience beyond her years, but also a carefully constructed wall that kept the world at bay. The first few days passed without incident. Sarah worked efficiently, treating minor injuries, monitoring vitals, and ensuring the trainees stayed hydrated during their grueling exercises. She spoke only when necessary, kept detailed notes, and maintained professional distance from everyone. The SEALs respected her medical expertise but found her strange, too quiet, too careful, too removed from the brotherhood that defined military life. During lunch on her fourth day, Sarah sat alone in the corner of the mess hall, methodically eating her meal while reading medical journals. The noise of the room seemed to wash over her like background static. She had perfected the art of being present but invisible, there but not really there. "Hey, Doc," called out Petty Officer Marcus Thompson, a young trainee with a cocky smile and too much confidence. "You ever treat anyone who's actually been shot? Or is all your experience from textbooks?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Several other trainees turned to look, curious about their mysterious medic's background. Sarah's hand paused for just a moment as she turned a page, the only sign that she had heard the question at all. "I have sufficient training for this position," she replied quietly, her voice steady but distant. Marcus wasn't satisfied with the non-answer. "Come on, Doc, we're sharing our lives with you out there. Don't you think we deserve to know something about yours? Where'd you serve before this?" Sarah closed her journal slowly and looked up at Marcus. For just a moment, something flickered across her face, pain, anger, or perhaps memory. But it disappeared so quickly that most of the men missed it entirely. Only Jake, who had been watching from across the room, caught the brief crack in her composure. "My previous assignments are not relevant to my duties here," Sarah said, standing up and collecting her tray. "If you'll excuse me, I have medical supplies to inventory." She walked away with measured steps, leaving behind a group of confused and slightly offended SEALs. They were used to the camaraderie that came with shared danger, the bonds formed through mutual respect and openness. Sarah's walls made them uncomfortable, suspicious. Even Jake followed her outside, catching up as she headed toward the medical bay. "Mitchell, wait up." She stopped but didn't turn around immediately. When she did, her professional mask was firmly back in place. "Yes, Commander? The men need to trust their medic completely. Lives depend on it. They're having trouble connecting with someone who won't share even the basics about her background." Sarah's jaw tightened slightly. "My medical credentials speak for themselves, sir. I've reviewed every man's file, know their medical histories, their weaknesses, their strengths. I'm prepared to keep them alive." "That should be sufficient." "Should be, but isn't," Jake replied, studying her face. "Look, I don't know what happened to you before you came here, and I'm not asking you to share your life story. But these men are going to face situations where they need to know their medic will have their backs no matter what. Right now, they're not sure you're fully committed to being part of this team. For a moment, Sarah's carefully constructed facade wavered. Jake saw something raw and painful flash across her features before she locked it down again. "I'll do my job, Commander. That's all anyone needs to know about me." She turned and walked into the medical bay, leaving Jake standing alone in the hallway. He had seen that look before, in the eyes of soldiers carrying invisible wounds, secrets too heavy to share. Whatever Sarah Mitchell was hiding, it was big enough to reshape her entire life around keeping it buried. As evening approached, Sarah worked alone in the medical bay, organizing supplies and updating training schedules. The base had grown quiet, most personnel either sleeping or engaged in night exercises. She preferred these solitary hours when she could work without the weight of curious stares or well-meaning questions. She pulled out a small, worn photograph from her wallet, the only personal item she allowed herself to carry. The image showed a younger version of herself in military uniform, standing beside 3 other soldiers, all smiling at the camera. Her finger traced the faces of her former teammates, posing at each one with a tenderness that contradicted her current emotional distance. A knock at the door made her quickly slip the photograph back into her wallet. Jake Reynolds entered, his expression softer than his usual commanding presence. "Working late again, Doc?" "Just catching up on paperwork," Sarah replied. Not looking up from her charts. Jake moved closer, noting the efficiency of her workspace and the attention to detail in everything she did. "You know, I've been in this business long enough to recognize when someone's running from something. Question is whether they're running from the enemy or from themselves." Sarah's pen stopped moving across the page, but she didn't respond. "Tomorrow we start live fire exercises," Jake continued. "The men will be using real ammunition, real explosives. Things can go wrong fast. I need to know that when the bullets start flying, you won't freeze up or disappear into whatever's keeping you so locked down." Finally, Sarah looked up at him, her green eyes holding steady despite the emotional storm he could sense beneath the surface. "I won't freeze up, Commander. When it matters, I'll be exactly where I need to be." There was something in her voice, not just confidence, but certainty born from experience. Jake nodded slowly, sensing there was much more to Sarah Mitchell's story than anyone realized. As he left the medical bay, he couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow's exercises might reveal more about their mysterious medic than she intended to share. The morning air was crisp as the SEAL trainees assembled for their first live fire exercise. Sarah arrived at the training ground early, her medical kit fully stocked and her emergency protocols reviewed. She positioned herself at the designated safe zone, close enough to respond quickly, but far enough from the action to avoid interference. Jake briefed the team on the exercise objectives while Sarah checked her equipment one final time. The trainees would navigate through a simulated urban environment, engaging targets while under pressure from smoke grenades and controlled explosions. It was designed to test their ability to function in chaotic, high-stress situations. "Remember," Jake addressed the group, "this is as close to real combat as we can get without actually being shot at. Treat every moment like your life depends on it, because someday it will." The exercise began with controlled precision. The SEALs moved through the course with practiced efficiency, their training evident in every calculated movement. Sarah watched from her position, monitoring each man's location and condition. Everything seemed routine until the unexpected happened. A malfunction in one of the explosive charges created a larger blast than intended. The force knocked 3 trainees to the ground and sent debris flying in all directions. Through the smoke and dust, Sarah heard the unmistakable sound of someone crying out in pain. Without hesitation, she grabbed her medical bag and ran toward the blast site, ignoring the protocol that required waiting for the all-clear signal. The smoke was thick, making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. She moved with purpose, following the sounds of distress. Marcus Thompson was on the ground, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle and blood seeping through his uniform. 2 other trainees, Rodriguez and Chun, were dazed but mobile, helping each other stand. Sarah immediately went to work on Marcus, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. "Stay still," she commanded, her voice cutting through his groans of pain. "Your leg is broken, but you're going to be fine." As she worked to stabilize the fracture, more debris shifted above them. A section of the training structure, weakened by the blast, began to collapse. Jake shouted warnings from his position, but the falling metal beams were headed straight for Sarah and Marcus. In that moment, something changed in Sarah. The careful, controlled medic disappeared, replaced by someone who moved with the fluid grace of a seasoned combat veteran. She grabbed Marcus under his arms and dragged him clear of the falling debris with strength that surprised everyone watching, but her actions didn't stop there. As she worked to treat Marcus's injuries, enemy contact alarms began blaring, part of the exercise designed to add additional stress. Most medics would focus solely on their patient, but Sarah's head snapped up, scanning the perimeter with eyes that had clearly done this before. "Rodriguez, check your 6 o'clock," she called out sharply while applying pressure to Marcus's wound. "Chun, you've got movement at 2 o'clock, approximately 50 meters. Her situational awareness was extraordinary. She somehow managed to monitor the tactical situation while simultaneously providing medical care, calling out threats and enemy positions, as if she had spent years in active combat zones. Jake watched in amazement as Sarah coordinated defensive positions while never taking her hands off her patient. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had given orders under fire before, and the trainees instinctively responded to her commands. "Thompson, you're stabilized," she announced, finishing her treatment. "The fracture is secured, and you're not in immediate danger. Rodriguez, I need you to help me get him to the extraction point." As they prepared to move Marcus, one of the training instructors, playing the role of an enemy combatant, emerged from behind cover closer than expected. The scenario called for the medic to call for help and take cover. But Sarah reacted differently. She assessed the threat in seconds, then smoothly drew her sidearm, a personal weapon she carried that most medics didn't bother with. Her stance was perfect, her aim steady, and her shot placement precise. The training instructor, wearing protective gear, went down with a hit that would have been fatal in a real engagement. The entire training ground fell silent. Even through the continuing exercise scenario, everyone present realized they had just witnessed something exceptional. Sarah Mitchell had just demonstrated combat skills that went far beyond standard medical training. She holstered her weapon and returned to Marcus as if nothing unusual had happened. "Let's get you out of here," she said calmly. Helping Rodriguez lift the injured trainee during the extraction, Sarah continued to direct the tactical situation with an expertise that left everyone speechless. She anticipated enemy movements, identified cover positions, and coordinated fire support with the precision of a seasoned infantry officer when they finally reached the safe zone. Marcus was transferred to the base hospital while the other trainees stood around in stunned silence. Jake approached Sarah, who was calmly cleaning her medical equipment as if the last 30 minutes had been routine. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" he asked quietly. Sarah didn't look up from her equipment. "Basic military training covers weapons proficiency." "That wasn't basic training, Mitchell. That was the shooting of someone who's been in actual firefights." "Multiple firefights." For the first time since arriving at the base, Sarah's composure showed visible cracks. Her hands paused in their methodical cleaning, and Jake caught a glimpse of the pain she worked so hard to hide. "I did what needed to be done," she said simply. "And the tactical awareness? The way you coordinated defensive positions while treating a patient? The instinctive threat assessment?" Jake pressed. "Those aren't skills you learn in medical school." Sarah finally looked up at him, her green eyes reflecting a mixture of defiance and exhaustion. "Some people pick things up quickly." But Jake wasn't buying the deflection anymore. He had served with enough combat veterans to recognize the signs. The way she moved under pressure, the automatic responses to threats, the seamless integration of medical and combat skills. Sarah Mitchell was no ordinary medic. Word of what happened during the exercise spread quickly through the base. The trainees who had witnessed Sarah's actions couldn't stop talking about it. Their mysterious, distant medic had just revealed herself to be something far more complex than any of them had imagined. That evening, As Sarah worked late in the medical bay once again, she felt the weight of exposure. She had worked so hard to blend in, to be invisible, to avoid drawing attention to herself. But in 30 minutes of crisis, she had undone months of carefully constructed anonymity. She pulled out the worn photograph again, staring at the faces of her former teammates. Her finger traced their features as memories flooded back, memories she had spent years trying to suppress. The laughter, the brotherhood, the shared dangers, and ultimately, the mission that had changed everything. A tear slipped down her cheek. The first emotion she had allowed herself to show since arriving at the base. Tomorrow would bring questions she wasn't ready to answer, attention she couldn't afford, and scrutiny that might uncover secrets she had sworn to keep buried. But tonight, alone in the quiet medical bay, Sarah allowed herself to remember who she used to be before she became the woman who had to hide from her own heroism. The atmosphere on the base had shifted overnight. Word of Sarah's extraordinary performance during the training exercise had spread through every unit, every mess hall conversation, and every barracks discussion. The quiet medic who had kept to herself was now the subject of intense speculation and growing respect. Sarah arrived at the medical bay earlier than usual, hoping to avoid the curious stares and whispered conversations. She had barely begun her morning routine when Jake Reynolds appeared in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing an expression that meant business. "We need to talk," he said, setting 1 cup on her desk and settling into a chair across from her. Sarah continued organizing her supplies, not acknowledging the coffee or the implied command. "If this is about yesterday's exercise, I filed my medical report. Thompson's injury was properly treated, and he's expected to make a full recovery." "You know that's not what this is about," Jake replied, leaning forward. "I ran some checks last night. Your personnel file is unusually thin for someone with your apparent level of experience. Most of your previous assignments are classified or redacted." Sarah's hands stilled for just a moment before resuming their methodical work. "I signed confidentiality agreements regarding my previous positions. I'm not at liberty to discuss classified operations." "Operations?" Jake caught the slip immediately. Medical personnel don't usually refer to their assignments as operations, unless they were involved in something beyond standard medical care. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions. Sarah finally stopped her busy work and faced him directly, her green eyes holding a warning. "Commander, I respect your concern for your men, but my background doesn't change my ability to do my job here. I've proven I can keep your trainees alive and healthy." "That should be sufficient." Before Jake could respond, Petty Officer Rodriguez appeared in the doorway, his face flushed with excitement and concern. "Excuse me, Commander Doc," he said, slightly out of breath. "We've got a situation with the new recruits. One of them is asking specifically for Dr. Mitchell." Sarah frowned. "I haven't treated any of the new arrivals yet." "What's the nature of the medical issue?" Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably. "It's not exactly medical, ma'am. The recruit says he knows you from before. Says he served with you in Afghanistan. He's pretty insistent about seeing you." The color drained from Sarah's face so quickly that Jake immediately stood up, ready to catch her if she collapsed. Her carefully constructed world was crumbling around her, and she felt powerless to stop it. "What's the recruit's name?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Corporal David Hayes, ma'am. He just transferred in from the Army Rangers." Sarah closed her eyes and took a slow, deep breath. David Hayes, she remembered him well. He had been part of her team during her last deployment, one of the few survivors of the mission that had ended her military career and nearly destroyed her life. "I'll handle this," Jake said, sensing Sarah's distress. "You don't have to see him if you don't want to." But Sarah was already moving, her professional mask sliding back into place despite the emotional turmoil underneath. "No, Commander. If Hayes is here, he won't stop until he gets answers. It's better to deal with this directly." They found David Hayes in the recreation area, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. He was a tall, lean man with prematurely gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. When he spotted Sarah, his face broke into a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Sarah!" "I can't believe it's really you," he said, moving toward her with open arms. Sarah stepped back, maintaining her distance. "Corporal Hayes, I understand you requested to see me." David's smile faltered at her cold reception. "Sarah, it's me, David. We served together in Kandahar. You saved my life, remember?" "I remember," Sarah replied quietly, her voice devoid of warmth. "But that was a different time, and I'm a different person now." Jake watched the interaction with growing fascination and concern. The dynamic between Sarah and David spoke of shared trauma and unresolved pain. David's obvious affection and gratitude contrasted sharply with Sarah's defensive coldness. Different person? David laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Sarah, you're a damn hero. What you did over there, stop." Sarah's voice cut through his words like a blade. "Don't say another word about what happened over there." "But people should know," David pressed, his voice rising with emotion. "They should know about the convoy ambush, about how you held off 20 insurgents while treating 3 wounded soldiers. They should know about the Medal of Honor you were awarded, about—" I said stop. Sarah's composure finally cracked, her voice echoing through the recreation area. Every conversation stopped as personnel turned to stare at the usually quiet medic, who had just raised her voice for the first time since arriving. The silence that followed was deafening. Jake's mind reeled as he processed what David had just revealed. Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration awarded for extraordinary heroism in combat. Sarah Mitchell wasn't just a combat veteran. She was a decorated war hero. Sarah looked around at all the staring faces, feeling trapped and exposed. The secret she had fought so hard to keep buried was now out in the open, spreading through the room like wildfire. "If you'll excuse me," she said stiffly, "I have duties to attend to." She walked away with measured steps, fighting the urge to run. Behind her, she could hear David calling her name and Jake ordering everyone to return to their business. But the damage was done. By evening, everyone on the base would know that their quiet medic was a Medal of Honor recipient. David found her an hour later in the medical supply closet, sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, knees drawn up to her chest. It was the most vulnerable he had ever seen, the strong, capable woman who had once carried him to safety under enemy fire. "Sarah, I'm sorry," he said softly, sitting down beside her. "I didn't know you were keeping it secret. I thought people here knew about your service record." "Why would I want them to know?" Sarah asked, her voice hollow. "So they can treat me like some kind of damaged war hero? So they can look at me with pity and ask about my nightmares? So they can wonder if I'm going to break down under pressure?" David was quiet for a moment, understanding her pain better than most. "Is that why you left the army? Because of what happened after the medal ceremony?" Sarah's laugh was bitter. "You mean the media circus? The politicians using my story for their campaigns? The constant interviews and appearances where I had to smile and talk about the worst day of my life like it was some kind of glorious triumph. You saved lives that day, Sarah. You saved my life." "And I lost 3 others," Sarah replied, tears finally flowing freely. "While everyone was celebrating my heroism, I was counting the faces of the soldiers I couldn't save. Do you know what it's like to be called a hero when all you can think about are the people you failed?" David reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "You didn't fail anyone. You did everything humanly possible and more. Tell that to the families of the soldiers who didn't make it home." They sat in silence for a while, 2 veterans sharing the weight of memories that civilians could never understand. Finally, David spoke again. "Running away won't make it hurt less, Sarah. I tried that for 2 years after I got out. But the guilt and the pain follow you wherever you go." "I'm not running away," Sarah protested weakly. "I'm trying to do good work without all the baggage that comes with being a poster child for military heroism." "But you're not doing the work you're truly capable of," David replied. "You're hiding your skills, minimizing your impact, pretending to be less than you are. That's not honoring the memory of the soldiers we lost. It's wasting the gifts they died protecting." Sarah wiped her eyes and looked at her former teammate. "What are you suggesting?" "Stop hiding. Be the medic you really are. Train these SEALs the way only someone with your experience can. Maybe it's time to turn your pain into purpose. As David's words sank in, Sarah realized that her carefully constructed walls weren't protecting her. They were preventing her from truly living. The question was whether she had the courage to let them down and face the world as she really was. The news of Sarah's Medal of Honor spread through the base like lightning. By the next morning, every SEAL trainee, instructor, and support staff member knew they had a genuine war hero working among them. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming, a mixture of awe, respect, and curiosity that Sarah had desperately hoped to avoid. She arrived at the medical bay to find a small crowd gathered outside, trainees waiting to catch a glimpse of the decorated medic they had previously dismissed as too quiet and mysterious. Sarah pushed through the group without making eye contact, her jaw set in determination to maintain some semblance of normalcy. Inside the medical bay, Jake was waiting with a stack of personnel files and a serious expression. "We need to discuss your new training protocols," he said without preamble. "There are no new training protocols," Sarah replied, beginning her morning equipment check. "My duties remain the same as outlined in my original assignment." Jake stood and moved to block her path. "Sarah, with respect, that's no longer your call to make. Word has reached the Admiral about your background. He wants to utilize your combat experience to improve our medical training programs." Sarah's hands clenched around the medical supplies she was holding. "I specifically requested a support position with minimal visibility. I don't want to be anyone's poster child or special project." "This isn't about publicity," Jake assured her. "This is about giving our people the best possible training. You have combat medical experience that most instructors only read about in textbooks. These men are going to face the same situations you survived. Don't you think they deserve to learn from someone who's actually been there?" The weight of his words settled over Sarah like a heavy blanket. She thought about Marcus Thompson's injury during the training exercise. How quickly a routine drill could become a life-or-death situation. She thought about the young faces of the SEAL trainees, so confident in their abilities but still untested by real combat. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" she asked quietly. "Redesign our combat medical training curriculum. Include realistic trauma scenarios based on your field experience. Teach these men how to function as both medic and soldier simultaneously, the way you do naturally." Before Sarah could respond, Rodriguez appeared in the doorway again, this time with Corporal Hayes in tow. David's expression was apologetic but determined. "Dr. Mitchell," Rodriguez said formally, "Corporal Hayes has requested permission to share some information about your previous service with the training candidates. He believes it would help them understand." "Absolutely not," Sarah cut him off sharply. "My personal history is not training material." David stepped forward, his voice gentle but insistent. "Sarah, these men are about to face the same challenges we did. They're going to be in situations where they have to choose between saving lives and completing missions, where they have to make impossible decisions under extreme pressure. Wouldn't you want them to learn from someone who's navigated those choices successfully?" "Successfully?" Sarah's voice cracked with emotion. "David, I still wake up every night reliving the faces of the soldiers I couldn't save. I still question every decision I made during that ambush. How was that successful?" "Because you kept fighting," David replied firmly. "Because you didn't give up when everything went to hell. Because you found a way to save some lives when saving all of them became impossible. That's the kind of strength these men need to learn." Jake watched the exchange with growing understanding. Sarah's reluctance wasn't about modesty or privacy, it was about guilt and trauma that she hadn't fully processed. Her heroism came with a cost that she was still paying. "What if we started small?" Jake suggested. "One session. Just the advanced trainees. You could share some general principles about combat medical care without getting into personal details." Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She thought about the eager faces of the SEAL candidates, their confidence unmarked by the reality of combat. She thought about the lessons she had learned in the hardest way possible, knowledge that could keep them alive when training exercises became real missions. One session, she agreed reluctantly, but I control what information is shared and how it's presented. 2 hours later, Sarah found herself standing in front of 12 advanced SEAL trainees in the tactical training room. Their faces showed a mixture of respect and curiosity. As they waited for the legendary medic to begin speaking, Sarah looked at their young, earnest faces and felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. These men trusted her to prepare them for the worst situations they might face. She couldn't let her personal demons prevent her from giving them every possible advantage. Combat medical care is nothing like what you've learned in textbooks, she began, her voice steady despite her internal turmoil. In the field, you're not just treating injuries, you're managing chaos. You're making decisions with incomplete information while people are shooting at you. She moved to the medical training dummy and began demonstrating advanced trauma care techniques. As she worked, her natural teaching ability emerged. She explained not just the procedures, but the thinking behind each decision, the split-second assessments that could mean the difference between life and death. In a firefight, you have to triage not just injuries, but situations, she continued, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. Sometimes the soldier with the worst injury has to wait because saving the one with the better chance of survival means you can get to safety and help more people. One of the trainees, a young man named Peterson, raised his hand. How do you make that kind of decision, man? How do you choose who to help first when everyone needs immediate care? Sarah paused, her hands stilling on the training equipment. The question brought back vivid memories of that day in Afghanistan, of looking at wounded soldiers and having to make impossible choices with enemy fire raining down around them. You don't have time to think about it, she said quietly. You assess the situation, use your training, and trust your instincts. And then you live with the consequences, whatever they are. The room was silent as the weight of her words sank in. These trainees had been preparing for combat scenarios in abstract terms, but Sarah was giving them a glimpse into the emotional reality of making life-and-death decisions under extreme pressure. As the session continued, Sarah found herself opening up more than she had intended. She shared tactical medical techniques she had developed in the field, explained how to maintain combat effectiveness while providing medical care, and demonstrated the kind of multitasking that had saved lives during the convoy ambush. The most important thing to remember, she concluded as the session ended, is that you can't save everyone. That's not a failure, it's a reality of combat. Your job is to save as many as you can and keep fighting until the mission is complete. After the trainees filed out, Sarah sat alone in the training room, emotionally drained but oddly relieved. For the first time since arriving at the base, she had used her full abilities without holding back. She had shared knowledge that could save lives, even if it meant exposing parts of herself. She preferred to keep hidden. Jake entered the room as she was packing up her equipment. How did that feel? He asked. Sarah considered the question carefully. Terrifying, she admitted. But also necessary. Those men deserve to hear from someone who's actually faced what they're training for. The Admiral wants to make this a regular part of the curriculum, Jake said. He's also interested in having you develop new medical protocols based on your field experience. Sarah nodded slowly, feeling a shift in her perspective. Maybe hiding from her past wasn't protecting her, maybe it was preventing her from honoring the memory of the soldiers she hadn't been able to save by ensuring that future soldiers had better preparation and training. I'll consider it, she said. But I have conditions. Name them. No media involvement, no publicity, no ceremonies or recognition events. I do this work because it needs to be done, not because anyone thinks I'm a hero. Jake smiled. Deal. But Sarah, you should know, whether you want the recognition or not, what you did today was heroic too. Those men are better prepared now because you found the courage to share your experience. As Sarah left the training room, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months, a sense of purpose that didn't require her to hide who she really was. 3 weeks had passed since Sarah's first training session, and the transformation was remarkable. The SEAL candidates who had attended her classes showed improved performance in medical scenarios, better decision-making under pressure, and a deeper understanding of combat medical protocols. Word of her teaching effectiveness had spread throughout the Naval Special Operations community. Sarah found herself settling into a routine that balanced her clinical duties with increasingly sophisticated training programs. She had developed new simulation scenarios based on real combat situations, created advanced medical protocols for field operations, and established herself as an invaluable resource for the SEAL program. However, her growing visibility came with consequences she hadn't anticipated. Military medical journals wanted to interview her about her innovative training methods. Superior officers from other bases requested her consultation on their programs. Most troubling of all, a military journalist had begun investigating her background for a potential feature story about Medal of Honor recipients in current service. The pressure was building, and Sarah could feel her carefully reconstructed life beginning to crack under the weight of unwanted attention. She had just finished an advanced trauma simulation when Jake approached her with a concerned expression. "We have a problem," he said, handing her an official-looking document. "Pentagon wants you to participate in a joint training exercise with multiple special operations units next month. It's a high-profile event with potential media coverage." Sarah scanned the document, her face growing pale. Joint exercise with Army Rangers, Delta Force, and Navy SEALs. Demonstration of advanced combat medical techniques. Media accessibility for educational purposes. She looked up at Jake with barely controlled panic. "I can't do this." "Sarah, this is exactly the kind of opportunity that could revolutionize special operations medical training. Your techniques, demonstrated on a national scale, could save countless lives." "And destroy what's left of my privacy," Sarah countered. "Once the media gets involved, my story becomes public property again. The families of the soldiers who died in Afghanistan will see my face on television, being celebrated for my heroism while their loved ones are still dead." Jake sat down across from her, his expression serious. "Is that really what this is about? Or are you afraid that stepping back into the spotlight means you'll have to confront the trauma you've been avoiding?" Sarah's hands clenched in her lap. "I'm not avoiding anything. I'm trying to do useful work without turning my worst experiences into entertainment for people who've never heard a shot fired in anger." But maybe," Jake said gently, "sharing your experience could help other people deal with their own trauma. Maybe the families of fallen soldiers need to see that survival doesn't diminish sacrifice. That honoring the dead means using what you learned from their loss to protect others." Before Sarah could respond, David Hayes appeared in the doorway. His expression was urgent, and he was slightly out of breath from running. "Sarah, we've got an incoming medical emergency," he announced. "Helicopter crashed during a training exercise off the coast. Multiple casualties, severe trauma cases. They're requesting you specifically for the medical team." Sarah stood immediately, her training overriding her emotional turmoil. "How many casualties?" "What's the ETA?" "4 confirmed casualties. 2 critical. 8 to 15 minutes. "But Sarah," David paused, his expression troubled, "one of the critical cases is Marcus Thompson. His unit was doing advanced flight training when the helicopter went down." The news hit Sarah like a physical blow. Marcus, the young trainee she had treated during the training exercise, was now fighting for his life. Without another word, she grabbed her medical kit and headed for the emergency medical bay. The next few hours passed in a blur of intense medical activity. The helicopter crash had resulted in severe injuries, multiple fractures, internal bleeding, traumatic brain injury, and severe burns. Sarah found herself leading a team of doctors and nurses, coordinating care for 4 critically injured SEALs. Marcus Thompson was unconscious when they brought him in, his condition far worse than his previous training injury. He had sustained multiple trauma, broken ribs, punctured lung, and significant head trauma. Sarah worked on him with the focused intensity that had made her legendary during her combat deployment. As she fought to stabilize Marcus, The irony of the situation wasn't lost on her. Here she was, using every skill she had developed through tragedy and loss to save the life of a young soldier who reminded her why she had become a medic in the first place. "His vitals are stabilizing," announced Dr. Williams, the senior physician working alongside Sarah. "Your field techniques are keeping him alive. I've never seen medical care like this outside of a war zone." Sarah didn't respond, her entire focus on Marcus's condition. She monitored every breath, adjusted medications with precision born from experience, and made split-second decisions that demonstrated the expertise she had gained through the worst possible circumstances. 6 hours later, all 4 casualties were stable. Marcus remained in critical condition but was expected to survive. As Sarah finally stepped away from the medical bay, exhaustion and emotion overwhelmed her. She had saved lives again, using skills that had been forged in the crucible of combat trauma. Jake found her sitting outside the medical facility, staring at the sunset with tears streaming down her face. He sat beside her without speaking, understanding that she needed time to process what had just happened. "He's going to be okay," Sarah said finally, her voice hoarse from hours of giving medical commands. "Marcus is going to make a full recovery." "Thanks to you," Jake replied. "Thanks to training, experience, and a lot of luck," Sarah corrected. "The same training I've been sharing with your teams." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes before Sarah spoke again. "The families of the soldiers who died in Afghanistan, they didn't get this outcome. They didn't get their sons and daughters back, despite everything I tried to do. But the skills you developed trying to save them just saved 4 lives today," Jake pointed out. "Maybe that's how you honor their memory, by using what their sacrifice taught you to protect others." Sarah wiped her eyes and looked at Jake with a new resolve. "The joint training exercise," she said. "If I participate, can you guarantee that the focus stays on training and education, not on my personal story?" "I'll make sure of it," Jake promised. "And can you arrange for the families of the soldiers from my unit who were killed in Afghanistan to be involved in the program development? I want their input on how their loved one's sacrifice should be remembered and honored." Jake smiled. "I think that can be arranged." As Sarah stood up to return to the medical bay and check on her patients, she felt something shift inside her. For the first time since leaving the army, she wasn't running from her past, she was transforming it into something that could protect future soldiers. The young woman, who had hidden from her heroism, was finally ready to embrace the responsibility that came with survival. Marcus Thompson and the other injured SEALs were alive because she had chosen to be more than just a quiet medic in the background. Maybe it was time to stop being afraid of who she really was and start using her experiences to ensure that other medics would be ready when their moment of crisis arrived. 6 months later, the Joint Special Operations Training Facility buzzed with activity as representatives from the Army Rangers, Delta Force, Marine Force Recon, and Navy SEALs gathered for the most comprehensive medical training exercise ever conducted. Sarah stood in the main briefing room, no longer the quiet, hidden medic who had arrived at the base almost a year earlier. The transformation was remarkable. She wore her uniform with quiet pride, her posture confident and assured. The haunted look that had shadowed her eyes for so long had been replaced by a sense of purpose and peace. She had found a way to honor her past while building a future that served others. "Ladies and gentlemen," Admiral Richardson addressed the assembled Special Operations personnel, "Dr. Sarah Mitchell will be leading today's training exercises. Her innovative medical protocols and combat-tested techniques have already revolutionized our SEAL medical training program." Sarah stepped forward, her voice clear and strong as she addressed the group. "Today we're going to focus on integrated medical and tactical operations. You'll learn how to provide life-saving medical care while maintaining combat effectiveness, how to make triage decisions under fire, and how to coordinate medical evacuation in hostile environments." In the front row sat 3 people who meant more to her than anyone else in the room. Margaret Thompson, Marcus's mother, had become an advocate for improved military medical training after her son's recovery. David Hayes had accepted a position as her training partner, helping to develop new protocols. And Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the widow of one of the soldiers killed in Sarah's original unit, had worked with Sarah to establish a memorial scholarship program for combat medics. "Before we begin," Sarah continued, "I want to acknowledge that every technique we'll practice today was developed through the sacrifice and experience of soldiers who didn't make it home. We honor their memory not through silence, but through ensuring that future soldiers have every possible advantage in similar situations." The training exercises that followed were intensive and realistic. Sarah had designed scenarios based on actual combat situations, incorporating lessons learned from her deployment in Afghanistan and other real-world experiences. Participants rotated through stations that tested their ability to function as both medics and soldiers simultaneously. At one station, trainees had to provide medical care to multiple casualties while coordinating defensive positions against simulated enemy attacks. At another, they practiced making rapid triage decisions in low-light conditions with limited medical supplies. Each scenario pushed them to think beyond textbook responses and develop the kind of intuitive decision-making that saved lives in actual combat. Marcus Thompson, now fully recovered and back on active duty, served as one of the scenario coordinators. His experience as both patient and trainee gave him unique insight into the importance of the training Sarah had developed. "6 months ago, I thought I knew what combat medical care was about," he told a group of trainees during a break. "Then Dr. Mitchell saved my life twice, once during that training accident and again after the helicopter crash. What she's teaching you isn't just medical techniques. It's how to function when everything goes wrong and lives depend on your ability to think clearly under extreme pressure." As the day progressed, Sarah moved between training stations, observing, correcting, and teaching with the natural authority of someone who had lived through every scenario being practiced. She no longer held back her knowledge or minimized her expertise. Every skill she had developed through trauma and loss was now being used to prepare others for the challenges they would face during the final debrief. A young Marine corpsman raised his hand. "Ma'am, how do you deal with the cases you can't save? How do you keep going when you lose someone despite doing everything right?" The question hung in the air, and Sarah felt every eye in the room focused on her. It was the question she had been asking herself for years, the one that had driven her into isolation and nearly ended her military career. "You remember that your job isn't to be perfect?" Sarah replied thoughtfully. "Your job is to do everything you can with the knowledge, skills, and resources available to you. Some situations are impossible to fix, no matter how skilled or dedicated you are. But that doesn't diminish the value of the lives you do save." She paused, looking out at the faces of men and women who would soon face the same impossible choices she had confronted. "The soldiers I couldn't save in Afghanistan taught me something important," she continued. "They taught me that survival carries responsibility. My responsibility is to use what I learned from their sacrifice to help others be better prepared, more skilled and more capable of saving lives when their moment comes." After the training concluded, Sarah found herself on the observation deck overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. She pulled out the old photograph of her original team, looking at the faces of her fallen comrades with sadness, but also with gratitude. Jake approached and stood beside her, following her gaze to the photograph. "How does it feel?" he asked. "Different," Sarah replied honestly. "For so long, I thought honoring their memory meant carrying the guilt silently, suffering in private as some kind of penance for surviving when they didn't. I thought that if I wasn't in pain, it meant I had forgotten them or diminished their sacrifice. And now?" Sarah smiled, the first genuinely peaceful expression Jake had seen from her since she arrived. "Now I understand that the best way to honor their memory is to use what their sacrifice taught me to protect others. Every soldier who gets better training because of the protocols we've developed, every life that gets saved because someone learned these techniques, that's how we keep their sacrifice meaningful." David Hayes joined them on the deck. carrying 3 cups of coffee and wearing the satisfied expression of someone who had watched a friend find peace. "So what's next for the famous Dr. Mitchell?" he asked with a grin. Sarah laughed, a sound of pure joy that had been absent from her life for too long. "Next month I'm heading to Army Ranger School to help develop their new medical training curriculum. After that, there's a request from Marine Corps Command to review their combat medical protocols. And the media requests?" Jake asked. "The interview requests are still pouring in?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "I'll do interviews that focus on training and education, that help promote better preparation for military medics. But my personal story isn't the point, the lessons learned are. If sharing my experience helps save lives, then it's worth the discomfort of public attention." As the three of them watched the sunset, Sarah realized that she had finally found the balance she had been seeking. She was no longer the wounded soldier hiding from her past, nor was she the reluctant hero running from responsibility. She was a medical professional using every tool at her disposal to ensure that other soldiers had the best possible chance of surviving and succeeding in impossible situations. Marcus Thompson appeared on the deck, moving with the easy confidence of a fully recovered SEAL. "Dr. Mitchell," he said formally, then broke into a smile. "Sarah, I just wanted to thank you again. Not just for saving my life, but for teaching me that being a medic means being ready for anything." Sarah clasped his shoulder affectionately. "You don't need to thank me, Marcus. Just promise me that you'll pass on what you've learned to the next group of trainees. That's how we keep the cycle going." As the group stood together watching the sun disappear into the Pacific, Sarah felt a profound sense of completion. The journey from wounded and silent to confident and purposeful had been long and difficult, but it had led her to exactly where she needed to be. She was no longer hiding from her heroism. She was using it to create heroes in others. The silence that had once protected her pain had been replaced by a voice that could save lives and honor the memory of those who had made the ultimate sacrifice. The young woman, who had once been afraid to let anyone see her combat skills, was now training the next generation of warriors to face their own moments of crisis with courage, competence, and hope.